The cameras started rolling at exactly 11 a.m. in a BC's Manhattan studio. The set of The View was as polished and bright as always. Underneath the glamour and studio lights, however, something felt different that Thursday morning. The guest was Harrison Ford, Hollywood icon, now 82, and on a farewell press tour for what he claimed would be his final Indiana Jones movie. He looked sharp in a tailored navy suit, a slight limp in his walk barely noticeable as he greeted the hosts. He had done a dozen interviews that week, but this one would be unlike anything before. The hosts smiled, the audience clapped. The energy was high. But behind the scenes, the crew whispered quietly into headsets. One producer stood in the shadows, biting her thumbnail, staring hard at the teleprompter. Something about this appearance had triggered higher security checks and even a surprise visit from an ABC legal advisor earlier that morning. Whoopi Goldberg opened the segment with her usual warmth. "Ladies and gentlemen, the one and only Harrison Ford." Cheers followed. Sunny Hostin followed with a sweet remark about her childhood crush on Han Solo. "You were my first movie boyfriend," she joked. Ford chuckled, gave her a half smile, and nodded politely. Then Joy Behar leaned forward in her chair. Her smile was sharp. "Harrison," she began, "you've had a legendary career, no doubt? But tell me, what's it like playing an action hero at 83? Shouldn't you be chasing a recliner instead of Nazis?" The audience laughed, some awkwardly. Ford's smile froze for a second. He looked directly at her. "I think the audience can decide if I'm too old to save the world," he said, voice steady. "And last time I checked, I still beat most of the younger guys up the stairs." Laughter again, but the tension was now present, quiet but thick. Joy leaned in further, her eyes glinting. Sure, she said. "But don't you think it's a little indulgent? I mean, really? Harrison, you've done it all. Don't you think it's time to pass the torch instead of trying to light it again?" Ford sat back, his expression unreadable. He looked at Joy for a long moment. Then he leaned forward slowly, his voice low but controlled. "Joy, I've been making films since before some of your viewers were born. I don't need a permission slip to do what I love. And I sure as hell don't need career advice from a daytime talk show host." The room fell silent. Single cough from the audience. The camera angle widened awkwardly as the director tried to keep things moving. Whoopi cleared her throat and jumped in. "So, Harrison, let's talk about your environmental work. I know you've been very passionate about the climate crisis." But Joy wasn't done. She smiled tightly. "I'm just saying," she interrupted, "we've got new stars now, new voices. Don't you think it's fair to step aside and make space? Let someone else have the spotlight for a change." Ford turned toward her again, this time his face harder. "You know what the real problem is, Joy? The media acts like the past is a burden. Like experience is something to be ashamed of. We used to respect the people who came before. Now we mock them, erase them." He looked directly into the camera, then back at Joy. "You want to talk about relevance? How about this? Not everything I did on screen was fiction." There was a moment of confusion. Some audience members murmured. Joy raised an eyebrow. "What does that mean?" Ford didn't answer right away. He glanced at Whoopi, then Sunny, then back at Joy. "You think all I did was swing a whip and chase villains for entertainment?" he said. "Some of us were used, not just for movies, but for something else. Something the public was never supposed to know." Joy laughed, trying to brush it off. "What? Are you saying you were a real-life Indiana Jones now?" Ford didn't laugh. "I'm saying there are people in Hollywood who were involved in things they didn't fully understand. And I'm saying I've seen things, signed papers, that I shouldn't have." He looked down at the table, then back up, eyes burning, with an emotion the audience hadn't expected. "Regret?" One of the camera operators whispered into his earpiece. "Do we cut to commercial?" The control room didn't respond. No one dared. "Let me tell you something," Ford continued. "There was a studio executive back in 2003. He offered me a script. It wasn't really a movie. It was a message, a cover for something else. That man now works in D.C. You probably voted for him. Joy stared at him, now visibly rattled. Are you saying what? That you were part of some kind of government operation? Ford didn't answer. He simply said, "I said too much already," and leaned back in his chair. A heavy silence filled the room. Whoopi finally stepped in again, trying to steer the city conversation. All right, folks, we're going to take a quick break. More with Harrison Ford when we come back. The studio lights dimmed slightly as the broadcast cut to commercial. But no one on the set moved. Joy Behar sat frozen, her eyes fixed on Ford. He looked back at her as if daring her to say more. She didn't. Behind the cameras, a phone buzzed. It was a text to one of the assistant producers. "Unknown number," he talked. "We need to move now." Something had just shifted. And it wasn't just an awkward moment on TV. It was the beginning of something much bigger. The news cycle exploded within minutes of the broadcast going to commercial. Clips of Harrison Ford's cryptic comments began circulating online with captions like "Real-life Indiana Jones." And what did Harrison mean? Millions watched and rewatched the moment where he said, "Not everything I did on screen was fiction." The tone of his voice, the tension in his eyes, none of. It felt like acting. In a small apartment in Brussels, a woman named Elena Ramirez sat in silence. A cup of cold coffee forgotten on the table beside her laptop. She had been watching The View on a foreign stream. At first, it was curiosity. But now she was frozen. Elena had once served as a covert analyst for the U.S. State Department. More importantly, she was a handler for a classified program known only as Project Shadow Anthem Post. 9/11's intelligence initiative. Designed to use celebrities as informal diplomatic couriers and influence agents in unstable parts of the world. She hadn't heard the name Harrison Ford connected to Shadow Anthem in nearly 20 years. Not since Moldova. 2004, the mission that went sideways. That mission that was supposed to be buried. She replayed the clip again. Ford didn't mention the project. But the tone, the timing, the phrase "cover for something else." He was speaking in code. Or maybe he wasn't. Maybe he had finally decided to let it out. She opened an encrypted folder on her hard drive and looked at an old photo. Ford, wearing civilian clothes, standing in front of a medical transport truck near the Romanian border. That picture was never supposed to exist. Meanwhile, back in New York, chaos swirled behind the scenes of The View. The producers had pulled Harrison into a side hallway during the break. What the hell was that? One of them hissed eyes. Wide, Ford didn't answer. He pulled out a pen and wrote 2 names on a sticky note. "Tell your legal team to call these people before this gets out of hand." Before they could respond, Joy Behar walked past. She glanced at him, then kept moving. Her usual confidence seemed shaken. In her dressing room, Joy closed the door behind her and stared at her own reflection. She hadn't thought about Moldova in years. She was only there for a week assigned by ABC to cover a refugee situation, or so she thought. But it wasn't just a refugee crisis. It was something else, something she wrote notes about. Notes that were stolen from her apartment 6 months. Later, she pulled out a locked drawer and took out a worn notebook. The first page had one word scrawled in red ink: Anthem. At that exact moment, in Washington, D.C., a different screen lit up. A man in a windowless office deep within a secure government facility watched the clip of Ford's interview. He didn't flinch, didn't blink. He simply picked up a black phone. "Started," he said. He broke protocol. "Do we silence him?" came the response. "No," the man said. "Too late for that. But track Elena Ramirez. She resurfaces, we shut her down." The government wasn't worried about Ford talking. They were worried about who might respond to him. Later that night on MSNBC, a panel of experts debated whether Harrison was having a senior moment or hinting at something real. Most laughed it off. But not Avery Klein. Klein, a former intelligence operative turned whistleblower journalist. tweeted something that lit up the conspiracy web. Everyone's looking at what Harrison Ford said. Pay attention to what Joy Behar didn't say. The tweet went viral. Joy's silence was indeed strange. Normally, she would fight back instantly. But after Ford mentioned the studio executive and the mysterious message script, she had gone completely quiet. Viewers noticed. At 3:14 a.m., Joy received a private message from an anonymous account. "You found the film reel in Moldova. The one they buried. You wrote about it. We kept it safe." Attached was a still image from 2004. Joy, standing in the background of a crumbling village school, holding a metallic case. That image had never been public. Her heart dropped. Across the Atlantic, Elena Ramirez was on the move. She packed a small black case, sealed her apartment, and left without a word. She was headed to Berlin, where an old contact from the Shadow Anthem program still owed her a favor. Her mind raced. If Ford was breaking his silence, it meant he either had nothing left to lose or someone had pushed him into it. Either way, the past was coming back. Back in New York, Harrison Ford stood alone in his hotel room, watching the skyline. He had spent years trying to forget what he'd seen. The morning after the explosive interview on The View, every major news outlet was running the same headline in different words. Harrison Ford drops bombshell live on air. Was he involved in covert operations? CNN, MSNBC, Fox News even? BB Saul scrambled to analyze the clip. Journalists replayed the footage frame by frame, examining his tone, facial expressions. And the cryptic comment, "Not everything I did on screen was fiction." Commentators argued whether it was a publicity stunt or a mental lapse, but a few saw something else, a message hidden in plain sight. By mid-morning, the clip had reached over 90 million views across platforms. But inside The View's production offices, it was panic mode. ABC Legal had already received a quiet but firm message from someone at the Department of Justice. "You are advised to refrain from airing any unaired footage from yesterday's episode involving Mr. Ford until further notice. National security interests may be involved." Joy Behar sat in her dressing room scrolling through emails. A new one had arrived with no subject line, no sender. The content was a single line. "We know what you buried in Moldova." He remembers. Do you? Joy's hands shook slightly as she clicked it closed. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was Whoopi. "Hey!" Whoopi's voice was low and serious. "You okay?" "No," Joy said honestly. "Something's wrong. Really wrong." Meanwhile, Harrison Ford was nowhere to be found. His team issued a vague press release about exhaustion and post-tour rest, but no one believed it. A reporter from The Intercept, Naomi Ellis, was already chasing leads and digging into a forgotten operation called Shadow Anthem. She had no proof yet, just whispers. But the name kept popping up in obscure intelligence leaks and redacted State Department memos from the early 2000s. Ellis called her source in Vienna. "You ever hear of Shadow Anthem?" she asked. A pause. "You need to stop asking questions." "About that," the voice said. "It's not buried. It's sleeping." Meanwhile, in Berlin, Elena Ramirez arrived at a small cafe off Alexanderplatz. Waiting for her was a gray-haired man in a tan coat. Lucas Meisner, a former field agent turned dissident. "I saw the broadcast," Lucas said as she sat down. "He did it." Elena nodded. "And now they're watching us again." Lucas slid a USB across the table. "I've been collecting pieces ever since the fallout. Emails, logs, even one of the original scripts." Elena's eyes narrowed. "The one they smuggled through the film festival circuit?" He nodded. "It wasn't a film. It was a message-coded language for a black site relocation plan. Ford was the face. Joy was the witness. You were the handler." Elena looked down at the USB like it was radioactive. "I leak this, I'll be hunted." "You already are." Back in New York, Joy decided to call someone she hadn't spoken to in years. Xavier Klein, the former CIA operative turned investigative reporter. When he answered, his voice was clipped. "You got about 2 minutes before they trace this." "I didn't leak anything," Joy said. "You didn't have to." Ford lit the match. "Up. But you're the one who held the gasoline." "I was just there to report," she said quietly. "You were there when it all went south. That school, that shipment, that child. You remember what they found in that basement?" Joy swallowed hard. "You said you'd publish the story," Klein added. "But you didn't. ABC buried it and you let them." Joy whispered, "I was scared." "Well, you should be scared now," Klein said, "'cause everything you saw back then is coming back, and this time it's not staying quiet." He hung up. Joy sat still for a moment. Then she pulled out a key from her wallet, tiny silver key marked Unit 3B. It belonged to a storage locker in Queens. She hadn't opened it in over 15 years, the same time a private meeting was taking place at Langley. Intelligence analysts had been forced to unseal classified files tagged with Harrison Ford 2004. Cultural cover ops. The man leading the meeting was Deputy Director Niles Carter. "We never had full control of Shadow Anthem," Carter admitted. To the small group, it was always half-blind. Civilian fronts, disinformation, back-channel diplomacy. But if Ford's memory is clear and Ramirez surfaces, we're exposed. One analyst, younger than the rest, raised a question. Why now? Why would Ford speak now? Carter leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. "'Cause he knows we're about to bring it back." Dead silence followed. Meanwhile, the video clip took on a new life online. Users began to match. Ford's words to old redacted memos leaked on WikiLeaks a decade ago, terms like Operation Theater Influence, Moldovan village containment, and asset film narrative. The phrase, "not everything I did on screen was fiction," became a meme and a warning. By the end of the day, someone leaked a still photo to the press. It showed Harrison Ford standing in front of a military transport vehicle in 2004, flanked by 2 armed guards, clearly not part of any movie set. The photo was grainy, but undeniable. Ford was in Moldova. The year matched. The operation was real. The internet went wild. In a dimly lit warehouse in Queens, Joy Behar unlocked the old storage unit. Inside were boxes she hadn't opened since 2005. She reached into one marked Europe Trip ABC Archives and pulled out a metal film canister. Taped to it was a sticky note in her handwriting, "Do not air. Ever." She peeled the note off and stared at the label beneath it. Anthem Final CUT 14 minutes. The reel felt heavier than she remembered. Outside, across the street, a dark sedan idled with its headlights off. A man inside lifted a phone to his ear. "She has the footage," he said, awaiting orders. In Berlin, Alina connected Luca's USB to her laptop and opened the first file. A recorded phone call. Played. It was Harrison Ford's voice, dated 2003. "You're asking me to play a part in real life? I'm not comfortable with that." Another voice replied, "You've been playing parts your whole life, Harrison. It's time you'll just be saving people for real." Alina hit stop. Her hands were trembling now. Whatever they were, all part of it was never really over. And now the world was finally watching. The footage was grainy, recorded on analog film and coated in the dust of 15 years. But the moment Joy Behar inserted the reel into an old projector in her apartment, the images sprang to life, blurry, shaky, but unmistakably real. Children running. A building half-bombed. A basement door forced open. The camera following someone, Harrison Ford, in civilian clothing, entering a dark corridor with a flashlight. Then the screen froze. An old Department of Defense watermark appeared in the corner. The reel cut to black. Joy turned it off. She sat motionless. Her heart pounded in her chest like a war drum. This wasn't a film, it was evidence. Proof that Ford hadn't been speaking metaphorically. He had been involved, and worse so had she. That very night, back at ABC headquarters, a second secret meeting took place. An executive producer, a network lawyer, and a government liaison from the Department of Homeland Security were reviewing Raw. The View footage, specifically the unaired segments. "I don't care about ratings," the DHS rep barked. "What I care about is what Joy Behar knew and when she knew it. That reel wasn't hers to keep." The producer sighed. "We didn't know it still existed. The original was assumed destroyed. Even Joy forgot about it, or pretended to." The liaison tapped his fingers on the desk. "You'll surrender the master files. Any footage that suggests Project Shadow. Anthem existed is now classified. That includes anything Harrison Ford said, even off camera." "But if we bury it again," the producer began. The man raised a hand. "This isn't about burying, it's about containment." In Berlin, Alina Ramirez stood by a river, wind biting at her cheeks. Lucas Meisner walked beside her in silence, hands deep in his coat pockets. "He said he didn't want to play a real part," Lucas said finally. "But the truth is, he did. Ford carried messages, sensitive names, maps. He delivered files into embassies under the cover of film promotion tours." Alina nodded. "When the mission went south, they left us all behind. Moldova was just one piece," Lucas said. "There were more ops: Bulgaria, Turkey, Armenia. We were pawns in a propaganda game." Only Ford didn't realize it until it was too late. Alina opened her bag and pulled out a thumb drive. "I'm going to release it all. With names. With dates. No more shadows." Lucas didn't answer right away. "If you do this," he said finally, "you'll be hunted. Not just by the Americans, but by those we exposed to." She looked him in the eyes. "Then let them come." Back in New York, the political response had already begun. By morning, a statement from the White House was issued. The administration does not comment on past intelligence programs, especially those involving private citizens or cultural institutions. That same day, Senator Evelyn Drake, chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee, called for a special closed-door hearing. "This isn't about celebrities," she said in a press conference. "This is about accountability. We need to know if the U.S. government used entertainers as intelligence assets without public oversight." Privately, her team had been digging into Harrison Ford's travel records. What they found matched almost perfectly with the timeline of several controversial diplomatic incidents between 2002 and 2007. And Werso's files had been redacted retroactively just hours before the news broke. By now, Harrison Ford was holed up in a secure compound in New Mexico, unreachable by press or public. But he wasn't hiding. He was preparing. In a conversation with his lawyer, he laid it out plainly. The streets outside Capitol Hill were packed. Protesters clutched homemade signs. "Actors aren't spies. No more shadow ops." "Tell the truth, Harrison." Inside the heavily guarded chamber, Harrison Ford sat silently at the witness table. His suit was simple. No Hollywood shine, no stage charisma. Just a man in his 80s with tired eyes facing the weight of a country's deception. Senator Evelyn Drake gavelled the room to order. "This hearing is classified," she said. "But what we discussed today may change the public narrative forever. Mr. Ford, do you swear to tell the truth?" "I do," he said, voice steady. The first few minutes were procedural: Ford's background, his film career, and his involvement in overseas press tours. But when the questioning turned toward Project Shadow Anthem, the atmosphere shifted. "Mr. Ford," Senator Drake began, "were you knowingly involved in a covert U.S. operation while overseas?" Ford paused. "Not at first," he said. "I thought I was doing favors delivering sealed envelopes to consulates, passing notes between embassy staff and journalists. They told me it was harmless, patriotic." "And when did you realize it wasn't?" "Berlin, 2005. I was told to deliver a package to an NGO office. A week later, that office burned down. So local staff were killed. I started asking questions. They told me to stop. And you didn't." He shook his head. "No. That's when I met Alina Ramirez." Senators leaned forward. She was the one who told me what the packages really were: data logs, surveillance records, identifications of local dissidents. They were turning us into smugglers of information they couldn't legally collect. The room went silent. Were there others? Senator Drake asked. Ford nodded. Yes, at least 5 others. Actors, musicians, journalists, most of them. Didn't know. Some ... chose not to ask. Back at the View, the mood was grim. Joy Behar hadn't returned to the studio in days. Her chair sat empty. Whoopi Goldberg opened the show with a heavy heart. What we're experiencing right now, she said, is more than controversy. It's a reckoning. And not just for Harrison Ford, but for the media, the government, and yes, us too. The audience was quiet, no applause. Sunny Hostin added, "We were told what to say, what to avoid." There were segments that were edited, conversations we weren't allowed to air. I thought it was just PR control. But maybe it was something more. In the control room, a producer whispered, "You think they'll cancel us?" "No," the director replied. "They'll try to own us." Meanwhile, in Berlin, Alina Ramirez uploaded the second part of her file leak to a secure server. This one contained black and white photos, some of Harrison Ford in Moldova, others of Joy Behar, surprisingly, handing a notebook to a man in U.S. military uniform. The caption read, "All of them knew. Some spoke, some stayed silent. Choose which side of history you want to be on." A call from Lucas Meisner interrupted her. "Alina," he said, breathless, "Interpol just issued a notice. You've been flagged. Someone's coming. Not running," she replied. "Let them come. If they arrest me, I testify." He was quiet for a moment. "Then let's make sure they hear everything before they shut us down." In Washington, a new player emerged. Congressman Ray Teller, head of the House Oversight Committee. Slick, camera-friendly, and ruthless. Teller saw an opportunity. "This isn't about Harrison Ford," he told reporters. "This is about government. Corruption, misuse of celebrity influence, and the dangerous blend of entertainment and espionage. I'm opening a full investigation." Behind the scenes, however, Teller had another agenda. His office had received a mysterious envelope days earlier containing a list of donors connected to Dawson Analytics, the same contractor in a leaked memo. It was leverage, and Teller intended to use it. Later that week, Ford gave a surprise interview to Avery Klein, the independent journalist working with Joy Behar. It aired on a late-night stream, watched by millions. Klein: "Why speak now, Harrison?" Ford: "Because the lies have piled up too high. And because I'm not afraid of the truth anymore." Klein: "Do you believe the American public will forgive you?" Ford: "It's not about forgiveness. It's about responsibility. I carried messages that got people hurt. I may not have known it then, but I know it now. And I owe them something, Klein. What about the others still in hiding?" Ford looked into the camera. "To those who know what we did, speak before someone else speaks for you." Across the country, reactions exploded. Some viewers hailed Ford as a hero. Others called him a traitor. Some demanded arrests. Others demanded answers. Thing was clear: the cover-up was collapsing. And at the center of it all, Joy Behar released a handwritten letter on social media. "I've said things for laughs. I've made light of things that were too serious. But I never intended to cover up a crime. I stayed silent out of fear. Not anymore." She ended with one line: "The View must now become the truth." By the end of the week, Congress scheduled a public hearing. The names on the witness list shocked the world. Harrison Ford, Joy Behar, Alina Ramirez, 2 former intelligence officials, a former Dawson Analytics executive. The headline on CNN read, "Hollywood, Espionage, and the Collapse of Trust, America's Most Explosive Testimony set to begin Monday." The world was watching. The truth was on trial. The hearing room was packed beyond capacity. Cameras from every major network were set up behind red velvet ropes. Security was tighter than usual: metal detectors, sniffer dogs, and armed federal agents lining the walls. The energy was electric, anxious, and historic. At the center of it all sat a table with 5 nameplates: Harrison Ford, Joy Bay, Helena Ramirez, Nathan Voss, former Deputy Director of Clandestine Operations, Margaret Sloan, whistleblower and Extosin Analytics Executive. The gavel struck 3 times. Congressman Ray Teller, now heading the Special Bipartisan Commission, adjusted his microphone. This is not a spectacle. This is an inquiry into allegations of state-sanctioned misuse of media platforms, unauthorized civilian involvement in foreign intelligence activities, and the deliberate suppression of truth for political moods. And we all know I've been exploring that path. This is an inquiry into alasis, efficies of an inquisine mood. I come to me in a pizzied Betty, unquire mood in a pals of medial, be wave commod. To agree accord in this, I commide with MK. With the whiz? FAY71 to the endeavor see we at we can you we to concact side you on we do we to see we get to with you within I just to see you I can we to kuziki you could a kite to I did a week to fake you for I could do you to die to where you could to connect ice I kick get if I can what car ends. Harrison Ford was the first to speak. His voice was calm, but heavy. I was used, he said, not as an actor, as a vessel. They knew I was trusted, beloved even. So they fed me lines not for films, but for real-life operations. I was told to meet people in cafes, carry notes in my luggage, mention certain names during press interviews abroad. It all seemed harmless until it wasn't. Congresswoman Marnie Shue leaned in. Mr. Ford, did you know that one of your contacts in Budapest was assassinated 3 weeks after your meeting? Ford nodded slowly. Yes, I found out through... Alina, that's when everything changed. Gasps rippled through the room. Next came Alina Ramirez. Her presence was electric sharp eyes, composed posture, and a folder full of evidence. I was embedded inside Dawson Analytics as an analyst. She said, we were told we were protecting national interests. But I discovered something else: targeting dissidents, journalists, and even U.S. citizens abroad. People like Ford were used as unknowing assets. Chui Behar wasn't just a talk show host. She was a relay node. Messages passed through her hands too. Joy, seated beside her, visibly winced. I didn't know what I was passing on, Joy said, her voice trembling when it was her turn. They told me it was background for future episodes, debate material, research. I didn't know I was helping run political surveillance operations. You never asked? Congressman Teller asked sharply. I asked once, she replied. They said national security. Don't ruin your career. And I didn't ask again. Senator Drake interjected. Journalists, media platforms used as covert infrastructure for intelligence operations. Yes, Margaret Sloan said firmly. Dawson Analytics was the shell company, but it was backed by real federal contracts: State Department, Pentagon, Homeland Security. The lines were blurred on purpose. A map was projected behind them, color-coded to show where civilian couriers had traveled over the past 15 years. Red lines traced Harrison Ford's press junkets, blue for Joy Behar's international panels, yellow for several others, still unnamed, marked classified. The final bombshell came from Nathan Voss, the man who had orchestrated much of the program in its early days. Did you sanction the use of celebrities as carriers of intelligence? Senator Drake asked. Voss didn't blink. Yes. Why? Because no one suspects a beloved icon. Nobody stops a talk show host at customs. They don't frisk Indiana Jones? That was the logic. A stunned silence hung in the air. And do you regret it? He hesitated. I regret the casualties. I regret the secrets, but I don't regret the mission. We were at war: cyber, economic, ideological. We used the tools we had. The hearing ended in chaos. Reporters surged forward. Protesters outside shouted, both for and against those who testified. On Twitter, the trending topics flipped every few seconds. Hashtag Harrison Ford Truth, #Behar Leaks, hashtag Dawson Cover-Up, hashtag Spy Media, hashtag The View unmasked in the quiet of a private corridor backstage. Joy Behar approached Ford. He looked at her, exhausted. "I didn't." "No," she said softly. "I thought I was just keeping the show afloat, making people laugh." Ford nodded. "And I thought I was just saving the world on screen." They both knew it wasn't that simple anymore. Outside the building, Alina Ramirez stood with Lucas Meisner, now officially her legal counsel and international advocate. "They'll try to bury this," Lucas said. "They always do." The morning after the hearing, something changed. Across America, coffee shops were louder, offices quieter, and dinner tables tense. It wasn't just about Harrison Ford or Joy Behar anymore. It was about trust, how easily it could be used, twisted, and weaponized. Harrison walked into a dimly lit studio in downtown D.C. for his first post-hearing interview. This time, it wasn't The View. It was Global Inquiry Live, an independent international news channel known for deep investigations and uncensored reporting. He looked tired but sharp. No Hollywood team, no makeup artist, no PR handler. Just Harrison Raw, real. The anchor, Amina Shah, wasted no time. "Mr. Ford, you helped expose one of the biggest covert media operations in U.S. history. But critics say you could have spoken earlier. Why now?" He nodded. "Because I finally understood the cost. Not to me, to the people who died, the journalists silenced, the activists tortured. I lived in fiction for decades. I mistook the role for the truth. Now I want truth, even if it costs me everything." Amina leaned in. "Do you believe your career was used as camouflage?" Harrison stared straight ahead. "Yes, my fame protected them. They knew the media would never question Indiana Jones or Han Solo, so they hid behind that mask. I was the cover story." The segment went viral within hours, but something else broke that same day. Alina Ramirez, through her secure channels, released a heavily redacted set of documents, emails between Dawson Analytics, top-level Pentagon officials, and even a few Hollywood producers. These messages discussed Operation Echo, a classified program designed to insert strategic influence assets into entertainment media to shift international sentiment and suppress enemy narratives. In one email, a studio exec wrote, "Ford's Q&A in Berlin should include reference to Russian aggression, but framed as a personal story. Keep it subtle." Another, "Joy's panel next week prep. Her with notes about regime instability in South America. Tie it to concerned celebrity activism. Ensure she doesn't realize the source." Social media exploded. Hashtag Echo Files began trending in 34 countries. Dozens of journalists who had been ignored or mocked for years were now suddenly being interviewed on major platforms. And then came the White House response. The press secretary stood stiffly behind the podium. "We acknowledge the existence of historical media influence operations authorized during past administrations. Current leadership has launched a full investigation. Those responsible will be held accountable." Reporters shouted over each other. "Will the president testify? Is Joy Behar under investigation? Was Harrison Ford's passport used to move operatives across Europe?" But no one got a straight answer. Meanwhile, The View announced a temporary suspension of all live broadcasts. Joy Behar was notably absent. Rumors swirled about internal conflicts, legal threats, and safety concerns. Behind the scenes, Harrison received a coded message. It came through Lucas Meisner, Elena's lawyer and trusted channel. The message read, "There's a vault in Vienna, 1977 to 1990, for everything is there. Film reels, audio tapes, handler logs. They never digitized it. Too dangerous. But they never destroyed it either." The files, according to Lucas, could prove the U.S. had not only used media icons as carriers, but had filmed some of the actual exchanges, creating a visual record hidden in European intelligence archives. Harrison didn't hesitate. By midnight, he, Lucas, and Elena were aboard a private flight to Austria. The next morning, beneath a dusty embassy building, they found the vault. Rows of reels, labeled not with names, but code numbers. One reel read, HF12288 Budapest. Another JB 4291 Oslo. They began watching, and what they saw shook them. Black and white surveillance footage of Harrison laughing at a cafe sliding. An envelope across the table to a man who would later disappear. Joy filmed entering a luxury hotel in Berlin, where a briefing kit was slipped into her dressing room by a U.S. operative. Other names appeared. 2 A-list actors, major anchors, even foreign leaders. They documented everything, every second. And then they leaked it. But not to American networks. Instead, they gave it to an international alliance of journalists from Der Spiegel, Al Jazeera, Le Monde, and The Guardian. Each outlet released synchronized reports, footage, and detailed timelines under a shared header. The Influence War: How Celebrities Became Weapons of the State. The fallout was nuclear. Senate investigations were reopened. Several former intelligence officials were arrested. Hollywood studios faced lawsuits from former stars who suspected they'd been manipulated. Sponsors pulled out. Co-government contractors were exposed. Trust in corporate news collapsed. And then came the wave of resignations. Joy Behar appeared in a final pre-recorded message. She sat alone, without makeup, looking older and more vulnerable than ever. "I made mistakes," she said. "I ignored the signs. I laughed when I should have questioned. I was used, and I allowed it. To everyone who trusted me, I am sorry." That video got over 300 million views in 3 days. As for Harrison Ford, he disappeared from public view. No interviews, no red carpets, no documentaries. But 6 months later, Elena posted a single photo on her encrypted blog. It showed Harrison wearing a weathered coat, standing beside a quiet mountain lake in Iceland. The caption simply read, "Some heroes don't wear capes. Some carry thee, truth," and that was enough, 'cause the story had changed the world. And this time the world had stayed awake.